I'd worked as an office administrator for nearly 5 years after leaving university. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and I'd grown used to the rhythm of it. Emails, schedules, filing, invoices, and the quiet satisfaction of being the person who kept everything running. When our company was bought by a multinational conglomerate, I tried to stay calm. People whispered about efficiency and restructuring, but I told myself it might even bring opportunity. For a short while, it looked manageable. Then the real changes began. Departments were stripped down. Familiar faces disappeared. Decisions were made in boardrooms hundreds of miles away. And eventually, the announcement arrived like a verdict. Our office would close completely. Operations would be moved to a central service center in the north, far from me, far from my life. On my final day, I packed my desk into a small box and walked out feeling like the floor had dropped away beneath my feet. I wasn't only upset about losing the job. I was frightened of what came next. In my area, businesses were downsizing everywhere, and the employment offices were already overwhelmed with people just like me, experienced, capable, and suddenly surplus. I had savings, thankfully, but I knew they wouldn't last. Within weeks, I moved out of my flat in a lively, up-and-coming part of the city. Bright windows, a view that always made me feel like the future might be wide and open, and into a smaller place out in commuter country. Not that I'd be commuting anywhere for a while. What hurt most was the sense of shrinking. My world felt smaller, fewer plans, fewer choices, fewer reasons to feel confident. Even the little comforts I'd relied on, my routines, my sense of identity, started to feel vulnerable under the pressure of money and uncertainty. Because there was another side to me, one I'd carried quietly for years. I'd been expressing that side of myself since I was a child, long before I had the language for it. Over time, it became a kind of private truth, something that made me feel calm and complete when everything else felt like noise. I wasn't confused about who I was. I simply had more than one way of being in the world. And when I stepped into that other self, I stepped into confidence. Sitting in my new flat, I spent a few days doing nothing productive, just staring at the walls, watching time slip, telling myself I'd start job hunting tomorrow. But one evening, I looked at my reflection and felt a sudden flare of defiance. I didn't want to disappear, so I decided I would go out. Just once. A night in the city. Music, lights, people, something to remind me I was still here, still capable of moving forward. I took my time getting ready, letting the familiar steps settle my thoughts. A long bath, careful grooming, hair washed and conditioned until it felt like silk. I sat at the edge of my bed and considered my options, what kind of look I wanted, what kind of mood I wanted to wear. In the end, I chose something bright and stylish, something that made me feel elegant rather than hidden. I did my makeup slowly and precisely, shaping and blending until the face in the mirror matched the person I felt inside, composed, confident, deliberate. When I finished my hair, soft and polished, the kind of style I'd admired on magazine covers, I added jewelry with a careful hand. A few pieces, tasteful but eye-catching. The final look wasn't about shock or attention. It was about presence. I checked myself in the mirror and, for the first time in days, smiled properly. Before I left, I set up my camera and took a quick photo, just in case I needed proof later that I'd once felt this steady, this self-assured. Then I grabbed my jacket and bag, called a taxi, and waited with a glass of wine that tasted like courage. When the intercom buzzed, I did one last check, keys, cash, makeup, then stepped out and locked the door behind me. The stairs echoed with each step. Outside, the night air hit my skin, cool and sharp. The taxi waited at the curb, sleek and dark. I slid into the back seat carefully and gave the driver my destination. Whispers, I said softly. It was a well-known gay club, the sort of place where people could breathe a little easier, where difference didn't automatically mean danger. The driver looked at me in the mirror with a grin that suggested he had his own assumptions, but I didn't let it bother me. Whatever he thought, I knew who I was. And I wasn't going to spend the night apologizing for existing. When we arrived, I paid and stepped out into the glow of the entrance lights. A couple of lads across the road whistled, amused by themselves, and I kept walking without reacting. If they had questions, they could keep them. I was done living my life for strangers. Inside, two huge doormen greeted me like an old friend. Steve and George, both intimidating at first glance, but kind in their own rough way. "Chantel," one of them said warmly. "Haven't seen you in ages." They took my jacket and waved me in, saving me the cloakroom fee, with a wink. It felt oddly comforting, this simple recognition, this casual acceptance. As if I belonged somewhere again. The club was already busy. Lights flickered in time with the music. The air held perfume, sweat, laughter, and bass so deep it vibrated in my ribs. People filled the space in every kind of style. Some dressed like they were heading to a regular night out, others dressed as if they were finally telling the truth about themselves. There were couples, groups, and people who moved alone with the confidence of someone who had stopped seeking permission. I sat at the bar and accepted a complimentary glass of champagne. After the first sip, some of the tension in my shoulders loosened. After the second drink, my thoughts stopped racing. I wandered from the main room to a smaller lounge area where the music was quieter and conversation was easier. That's where I saw Monica. She was the first woman I'd ever met while living openly as Chantel, and she'd become something like an anchor in my life. Monica ran a dressing service in the city center, professional, discreet, and always in demand. But more importantly, she had that rare combination of kindness and fearlessness. She could read a room instantly, handle any situation, and still make you feel safe. She looked stunning, effortlessly. When she spotted me, she lit up and pulled me into a hug, kissing me on both cheeks. "About time," she said, stepping back to look me over with a proud, approving smile. We talked for ages. When I told her about losing my job, her expression softened, and she listened without interrupting. She had that gift of making you feel heard, not pitted, not fixed, just understood. "Something will come up," she said firmly. "Sooner than you think." The night passed in a blur of conversation and laughter. When the lights finally came up, signaling closing time, I blinked in surprise. Monica and I left together, collecting my jacket on the way out. Steve made a playful comment about dinner on Sunday, and Monica raised her eyebrows at me like she'd caught a secret. Outside, Monica flagged a taxi and insisted on sharing it, even though my new flat was in the opposite direction. I tried to refuse, but she wouldn't have it. "I'll stay over," she said casually, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "I'm not leaving you alone tonight." Back at my place, she called her husband to let him know where she was. From the way she spoke, it was clear this wasn't unusual. He sounded distracted, busy, someone who cared in his own way but lived inside his work. Monica didn't seem to mind. If anything, she enjoyed the freedom his distraction gave her. We shared a bottle of wine and talked until we were sleepy. Monica had a habit of taking charge in a way that felt protective rather than controlling, and that night I let her. It was comforting to have someone else steer for a while. In the morning, she woke me with breakfast and watched me get ready. Over coffee in the lounge, we argued playfully over the local newspaper. She wanted the advertisements, I wanted the fashion section. Then she laughed suddenly and pointed. "Oh, this one is absolutely you," she said. It was an advert in the Lonely Heart section, written like a job offer disguised as personal taste. A very generous businessman, mid-30s, was seeking the company of an extra special woman, someone fashionable, intelligent, educated, comfortable in social settings, and capable of assisting with business events. Expenses paid. Office skills required. Monica read it aloud with theatrical seriousness, then lowered the paper and stared at me like she'd discovered treasure. "That describes you perfectly," she said. I snorted. "How does that describe me?" She began dismantling the advert line by line as if she was building a case in court. My education, my experience, my confidence, my ability to present myself well. With every point she made, her eyes shone brighter, and I felt a nervous laugh rise in my throat. "It's risky," I said. "We'll never know unless we try," Monica replied. Before I could stop her, she grabbed my phone, dialed the number, and pressed it into my hand. It rang. My stomach tightened. A cool, controlled voice answered almost immediately. I introduced myself and asked if the position was still open. The man asked questions, practical, direct, almost clinical. My age, my height, my build. Then, without hesitation, he told me to attend an interview that afternoon at the county hotel. 3 o'clock. In the lobby. He also made a specific request about what I should wear, precise enough that it sounded less like a suggestion and more like a test. When I asked how I would recognize him, he replied simply, "I shall recognize you. I know exactly what you will be wearing." And the line went dead. Monica and I stared at the phone for a second, then burst out laughing, half shocked, half exhilarated. "You have to do it," she said, eyes gleaming. "I dare you." I opened my mouth to refuse, to call it foolish, to retreat into safety. But deep down, something else was waking up. Curiosity, boldness, the sense that the universe had slid a strange door open right in front of me. By midday, Monica had turned my living room into a planning room. She moved with the brisk confidence of someone who'd built a career from appearances and first impressions. While I hovered between excitement and nerves, she spoke in certainty. "This isn't a date," she told me. "It's an audition. Treat it like one." She left to pick up an evening dress from her shop, promising I wouldn't see it until the moment she decided I should. While she was gone, I tried to settle my thoughts by focusing on small, practical tasks, showering, grooming, making sure I looked as polished as possible. The interview wasn't for my former working self. It was for Chantel. When Monica returned, she arrived with a dress carrier like a magician carrying a secret. She watched me dress with an appraising, almost professional gaze, adjusting details and smoothing lines. She styled my hair into a neat, elegant twist and did my makeup in soft, controlled tones, refined rather than loud. "You need to look like you belong in the lobby of a place like that," she said. "Like you've walked through those doors 100 times." At 2 o'clock, we left together. Monica insisted on driving so I could keep my nerves in check. The closer we got to the county hotel, the quieter I became. When we pulled up outside, it looked like a world that didn't allow mistakes: glass, stone, carpet, and confidence. Monica squeezed my hand. "I'll be nearby," she said. "You do your part. I'll do mine." With a careful breath, I walked into the lobby. It was all muted luxury, expensive furniture, polished surfaces, the kind of quiet that felt purchased. People moved with purpose, as if they had schedules to keep and people waiting for them. I forced myself not to shrink. I stood tall. I held my posture. I became the version of myself that didn't ask permission. Then I sensed movement to my left. A man approached, tall, composed, silver threaded through dark hair, dressed in a light gray suit that looked tailored rather than bought. His presence pulled attention without him having to demand it. He stopped in front of me and let a small, restrained smile appear. "Chantel," he said, as if confirming a fact. Up close, he was even taller than I'd realized. Even with heels, I had to tilt my head slightly to meet his eyes. "I'm glad to see you're punctual," he said, "and capable of dressing as requested. Follow me." He didn't offer to carry my briefcase or take the dress carrier. He simply turned and walked, setting a pace that forced me to move carefully. My outfit limited quick steps, so I chose elegance over speed, measured, deliberate, controlled. That seemed to please him. I caught the faintest hint of approval in his expression. Instead of the lifts, he led me toward a broad staircase, one of those sweeping staircases you'd expect to see in old films, built for dramatic entrances. When he gestured for me to go ahead, I felt his attention on me as I climbed, steady and slow. "Second floor," he said. At the landing, he opened double doors with a keycard and ushered me into a suite that felt more like a private office than a hotel room. Plush carpet, a large desk with a laptop, a table laid with papers. Beyond an open doorway, I glimpsed a bedroom and an immaculate bathroom. "Put your things there," he said, nodding toward a side area. "Then fill in the questionnaire on the computer." His tone suggested this was routine, something he'd done many times. And that, more than anything, unsettled me. I crossed to the desk, opened the file he directed me to, and began. At first it was ordinary. Address, previous employment, education. Then the questions shifted into detailed measurements and preferences. numbers, proportions, choices of fabrics, colors, styles. It felt like the kind of information used to build a wardrobe around a person, around a role. After that, the questions became stranger, emotional triggers, reactions, hypothetical scenarios. It was as if he was assembling not only my appearance but my temperament. A profile. I paused once or twice, wanting to ask what exactly I'd walked into. But each time, I found myself continuing, partly out of curiosity, partly because I hated the idea of retreating. At one point, there were questions about banking and insurance, too personal, too fast. When I asked whether that was really necessary, he didn't look up from his papers. "Fill in what you choose," he said. "Disclose what you're comfortable disclosing." His answer was controlled, almost indifferent. Yet it carried an assumption that the system would proceed with or without my comfort. By the time I reached the end, I glanced at my watch and felt a jolt. An hour and a half had passed. I became aware of him behind me before I saw him, as if the air had shifted. He leaned close enough to point at the screen, his hand brushing my shoulder in a gesture that felt both casual and deliberate. With a few taps, he brought up a list of email addresses. Then, without ceremony, he sent the completed questionnaire away. I caught 2 addresses I recognized, a bank name I'd never heard of and an insurance company. He stepped back. "Your new bank details will arrive on Monday morning," he said. My pulse kicked. "Are you saying I've got the job?" He looked at me for a moment, expression almost unreadable.
"No," he said.
"I'm saying your account details will arrive on Monday. I'll decide whether to put anything in it this evening." Then, as if this were an ordinary next step, "We'll go out. Change into your evening dress." I didn't like the way my life was being handled, like paperwork. But I also felt something else rising, stubbornness, determination, a refusal to be intimidated. I picked up the dress carrier and gave him my best confident smile. "In that case," I said lightly, "I'll be quick." In the dressing room, I unzipped the carrier and froze. The dress inside was crimson satin, rich, dramatic, unmistakably designed to turn heads. The cut was bold and theatrical, made for a woman who expected the room to watch her. For a long moment, I simply stared, my breath caught between disbelief and admiration. Then I changed. I refreshed my makeup, deepened my eyes, refined the color on my lips. I took down my hair and reshaped it, more glamorous now, more evening than interview. When I finished, I stepped back from the mirror and hardly recognized myself. Not because it didn't look like me, because it looked like the me I'd always imagined I could become. I walked out of the dressing room and paused, just for a heartbeat, allowing the moment to land. He was standing by the table, adjusting his cufflinks, now dressed in formal evening wear with subtle scarlet accents that echoed my dress. His eyes traveled over me in a slow, assessing scan, thorough, unhurried, like an inspection rather than admiration. I waited for a compliment. None came, only that slight, restrained smile again. Almost a signal, as if I'd passed a test. "Come here," he said. "Stand by the table." I obeyed, posture straight, chin lifted. He moved behind me. I felt cool metal at my neck as he fastened something in place, then something at my wrists, then weight at my ears as he replaced my own jewelry with pieces that glittered like light caught in ice. "Close your eyes," he said quietly. I did. A moment later, something unbelievably soft settled over my shoulders. "Open your eyes." In the full-length mirror, the reflection stole my breath. A broad, sparkling collar at my throat, matching pieces on my wrists, earrings that cascaded like silver rain. And over everything, a pale, luxurious coat that made the entire look feel unreal, like I'd stepped out of someone else's life. For once, I couldn't find words. I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze in the mirror. His face remained composed, but his eyes were watchful, measuring my reaction, storing it. "Thank you," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded once, as if gratitude were expected, not earned. He held the door for me, then offered his arm in the corridor. For a second, I felt the urge to lean into that solidity, into the certainty he seemed to carry so effortlessly. But I kept my control. When we reached the main staircase down to the lobby, my heart began to hammer. People moved below, and I saw heads turn, first one then another. I felt the heat of attention like a spotlight. He slowed slightly, as if allowing me my moment. Step by step, I descended. Carefully. Elegantly. It felt like walking into a scene I hadn't auditioned for, wearing a costume I hadn't chosen, surrounded by an audience I hadn't invited. And yet, I couldn't deny it. Part of me loved it. In the lobby, instead of guiding me to a restaurant, he directed me to a cocktail bar tucked into a corner. A doorman led me to a private booth and helped me with the code, but I insisted on keeping it close. Almost instantly, champagne arrived. No waiting, no questions, as if the room had been trained to anticipate my needs. The attention became a strange kind of pressure. I held my glass carefully and tried not to look like someone who didn't belong. Minutes passed, then more. By the time he returned, nearly 3/4 of an hour later, my patience was thinning. He sat down with the calm of a man who didn't apologize because he didn't need to. His first question wasn't, "Are you comfortable?" or "Did you wait long?" It was, "Why did you insist on keeping the coat?" I explained evenly that I didn't want it out of my sight among staff I didn't know, in a place where I didn't understand the rules. He listened, then nodded once, accepting my reasoning as if it were another mark on his internal checklist. Then he stood. I rose as well. He took my left hand, not his arm, not my elbow, but my hand, and led me out of the bar and across the lobby toward the main entrance. Outside, under the canopy, a huge black Mercedes pulled up. A uniformed chauffeur opened the rear door with practiced precision. I stepped into the cavernous interior. He joined me a moment later. With a soft mechanical sound, a smoked glass screen rose between us and the driver, sealing us into privacy. Only then did he speak, as if we'd simply moved into the next stage of a plan. "Vans," he said. He opened a black leather container and produced a small crimson evening bag with a delicate chain strap, handing it to me. "I hope everything you need is in there," he said. Inside, I found essentials and a money clip thick with notes. Seeing my expression, he allowed the smallest flicker of amusement. "It's a casino," he said. "There's no point going without a stake." He explained the evening with chilling efficiency. We would meet an acquaintance and his wife. I would keep the wife company while he handled business. If the meeting ran long, I'd be left a maximum of 2 hours. Then I was to return to the cloakroom, retrieve my coat, and the car would bring me back to the hotel. He said it like instructions in a briefing, not a plan for a night out. I wanted to protest, to ask who he really was, to ask why any of this was happening. But before I could speak, he lowered the screen and gave the driver precise directions, timing included, then raised it again. The message was clear. The machine was already moving, and I was inside it. The car rolled through the city to an area that looked sharper, brighter, more expensive. Finally, we pulled up outside a building lit with bold, garish confidence, music and movement visible through glass. My stomach tightened. This wasn't Whispers. This wasn't my world. The chauffeur opened my door. He stepped out first and held his hand toward me. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I took his hand and stepped onto the pavement, feeling the night air touch my skin and the weight of the evening settle onto my shoulders. As we approached the entrance, a man in a worn tuxedo clapped him on the shoulder and greeted him by name. Paul. A blonde woman in a shimmering dress appeared and addressed him formally. "Mr. Jacobs." So that was it. Paul Jacobs. He led me inside without looking back, as if he never doubted I'd follow. And I did, because curiosity can be stronger than fear, and because part of me needed to know what kind of man builds a world like this, and then invite someone like me into it. Inside, the casino hit me like a different climate, warmer, louder, brighter, and sharper around the edges. The air smelled of money and perfume, of polished wood, and expensive drinks. Everywhere I looked there were tables, lights, moving crowds, and the constant soft music of risk, chips clicking, cards shuffling, laughter that sounded a little too controlled. A man in a faded tuxedo greeted Paul with easy familiarity, patting his shoulder as we passed. "Paul," he said, as though the name belonged here. A stunning blonde in a sparkling green dress appeared almost instantly, smiling like a hostess trained to welcome secrets. "Mr. Jacobs," she said, and guided us toward a smaller room off to one side. A burly guard opened the door. We stepped through. The lighting was dimmer inside. A small card table sat in the center with several men gathered around it, their faces half-lit, their attention turning toward us with the slow curiosity of people used to assessing value. Paul didn't hesitate. A cloakroom attendant took my coat without asking, and I felt eyes on me, not hostile, but measuring. The kind of attention that made my skin tighten with awareness. Then, from close beside me, a soft voice spoke, smooth, honeyed, and lightly accented. "So, you must be Chantel." I turned and saw a woman who looked effortlessly composed, the kind of person who didn't need to raise her voice to be listened to. She had golden hair styled neatly and a confidence that didn't look practiced, it looked owned. "Come along, darling," she said gently. "Let's leave them to it and go enjoy ourselves." Before I could properly understand what was happening, I was being guided back out into the main casino, away from the private room and its heavy atmosphere, into the open glitter of public gambling. Only once we reached a quieter space did she introduce herself. "I'm Patricia," she said, then smiled. "But everyone calls me Trish." There was something about Trish that steadied me. She didn't look at me like I was unusual. She didn't act as though my presence was a novelty. She spoke to me like I belonged. We found a restaurant toward the back. An attentive waiter appeared instantly, and before I could even reach for a menu, Trish ordered for us with calm certainty, like someone who knew exactly what would be served, exactly how it would taste, exactly what she deserved. Over the first course, she asked casually, "How long have you known Paul?" I chose my words carefully.
"Not long," I said.
"We're still getting used to each other, I suppose." She studied me for a moment, then smiled as if she approved of my restraint. More questions followed, not interrogation, more like gentle mapping. Where I lived, what I did, what I enjoyed. And in between, she dropped small details that helped me build a picture of Paul Jacobs without her ever explicitly explaining him. By the time my main course arrived, I'd learned a few things. Paul was extremely wealthy. He worked constantly. He held influence in circles where people didn't ask too many questions, and there were those around him, friends, acquaintances, a social group, Trish said with mild amusement, who wanted him to settle down with the right kind of woman. I nearly laughed at the phrase "the right kind of woman." Instead, I kept my expression composed and listened, letting Trish fill the silence with elegant ease. After dessert and coffee, we returned to the tables. Trish played with the casual competence of someone who didn't fear losing. I tried a few games cautiously, cards, chips, small choices, learning as I went. The stakes were real, but the experience felt unreal, like I'd stepped into a film where everyone else knew the script. At the roulette wheel, Trish explained just enough for me to understand the basics. My hand hovered over my cash. A nervous spark ran through me. Then, on impulse, I placed my bet on number 11. It was a small bet compared to the others around the table. Mine looked modest next to the heavier piles, but it felt enormous to me. When the wheel slowed, when the ball clicked, when it finally settled, 11. For a fraction of a second, triumph roared inside my head so loudly, I thought it would show on my face. But I held my expression, lifting my chin like I'd seen Trish do earlier. Cool, controlled, almost bored. A large, silent security man appeared beside me as if he'd been summoned by the winning itself. With reluctant fingers, I handed over chips, and my winnings returned as neat stacks of cash. Trish watched me and gave a small, approving nod. "That's it," she said softly. "Keep your composure. Always." We wandered toward a bar area and sat on stools with drinks. Trish guided me through a large machine game, simple enough once she explained it. To my surprise, it paid out. Chips and tokens accumulated in front of us, and for a brief stretch of time, I felt something I hadn't felt since losing my job. Luck. While we were dividing up the winnings, the blonde hostess in the sparkling green dress approached with a bright, professional smile. "Mrs. Corcoran," she said to Trish, "Mr. Corcoran has finished his meeting. He'd like you to meet him in the members' bar." Trish rose smoothly. Before she left, she leaned in and kissed my cheek. "Tell Paul," she said warmly, "that he must bring you to dinner again." Then she followed the hostess away into the crowd, disappearing with the same effortless certainty she'd arrived with. I watched them go, then felt the quiet signal settle into my bones. That was my cue. I turned in the opposite direction and headed toward the cloakroom. My coat was returned without delay. Along with it came a thick brown envelope, handed over with a smile that was just a little too practiced. As I stepped away, the blonde hostess caught up to me again. This time she helped me into my coat, her hands careful, her manner formal, then suddenly less formal. She held my hand a moment longer than necessary and smiled up into my eyes. It took me a second to understand. Then it clicked. She was flirting. I smiled back, warm but controlled, and squeezed her hand lightly, the way you do when you're accepting a possibility without making promises. Her smile widened, then she hurried away, as if she'd remembered she was being watched. Outside, I paused under the entrance lights, letting the night air clear my head. Headlights flared to my right. A car rolled forward slowly, stopping in front of me. The chauffeur stepped out and opened the rear door with crisp professionalism. I slid into the back seat. As the car moved off, I lowered the divider screen and caught the chauffeur's eye in the mirror. "Have you been waiting long?" I asked. "Just a few minutes, ma'am," he replied.
Ma'am.
I didn't correct him. "Straight back to the hotel," I said. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The divider rose again, sealing him away behind smoked glass, leaving me alone with my thoughts, my coat, my winnings, and the envelope that felt far heavier than paper should. The hotel lobby was still busy when I returned, wealth moving in polished shoes, conversation soft and private. I crossed to reception and waited as the clerk finished assisting an elderly couple. When she turned to me, she smiled brightly, as if she'd been trained never to look tired. "How can I help you?" "Yes," I said carefully. "Are there any messages for or from Mr. Paul Jacobs?" "One moment, please." She disappeared briefly and returned with a large white envelope addressed to me. "Miss Chantel Pearson." I signed for it, thanked her, and moved toward the cocktail bar, toward the same corner booth from earlier, where everything seemed to happen without anyone having to ask. A drink appeared quickly. I tried to wave the attention away, but the hotel staff moved like a system. Smooth, silent, inevitable. When I opened the envelope, I found something stranger still. An envelope inside it, and on that inner envelope, neatly written, "Open in the suite." Also inside, the key card to the suite. At least I wasn't going to be sleeping on the streets tonight, I thought, though my feet, even with all my love of heels, were beginning to argue loudly for mercy. I finished my drink and went upstairs. In the suite, I set the coat aside and finally sat down properly. The silence felt expensive. I slipped off my shoes with a slow relief that made me exhale. Only then did I notice a bottle of champagne waiting in an ice bucket, positioned like an assumption. I opened it anyway. If this night had taught me anything, it was that control might have to be taken in small, defiant sips. Then I opened the inner envelope. Inside was a letter, typed or written with precise, unsentimental neatness. No terms of affection. No warmth. Just instructions. If I was reading it, Paul trusted I'd returned safely. There were items in the wardrobe I could take if I wished. He included 2 contact numbers. One for the car phone, which would transfer to the chauffeur if the car wasn't in use, and another for a small office he kept in the city center. He would be there on Monday between 11 and 3. If I wanted to work for him, I was to call the chauffeur, who would bring me in. There was also a request about how I should dress if I chose to come. Short, neat, office-styled, carefully put together. At the end, simply, "Regards, Paul." I read it twice more, then felt a stab of guilt. Monica. She would be worried sick. I grabbed the phone and called home. She answered, sleepy at first, then furious the moment she recognized my voice. "Where the hell have you been?" she snapped. "I'm safe," I said quickly. "I'm back at the hotel. I'm alone. I'm fine." I explained as much as I could, What happened, where I'd been taken, who I'd met, the name Paul Jacobs, the casino, the chauffeur, the envelope at reception. Monica calmed, but only slightly. I could practically hear her mind working, storing details like a detective. Is it above board? She asked. Or, is it dodgy? I don't know, I admitted. It could be either. It's all too smooth. Too controlled. Then I remembered the brown envelope from the cloakroom. I retrieved it from my evening bag and opened it. Inside was a thick stack of 20-pound notes, enough that my breath caught. I guessed roughly around 1,000 pounds, maybe more. And tucked inside was a note from the blonde hostess. Her name was Sandra, and she'd written her number. Monica made an indecent noise of delight down the line, half laughing, half cheering. I didn't tell her everything, not yet. Some parts felt too strange to say aloud. I only promised her I'd come home in the morning. Before we hung up, she tried, once again, to tease me. He's good-looking, isn't he? She pressed. Are you sure you're not interested? No, I said too fast. Then, more honestly, he intrigues me. That's different. Monica laughed like she didn't believe in different. After the call, champagne in hand, I crossed the wardrobe. The first doors revealed nothing unusual, just empty space and hangers. Then one door opened to reveal something prepared with deliberate care, a night outfit laid out like a gift, pale and luxurious, the kind of thing that belonged to a life far above mine. For a moment, I simply stood there, staring. Then I noticed something else pushed toward the back, a large suitcase, heavier than I expected. My mind immediately filled with theories, money, documents, something illegal. The word crime drifted close enough that I forced myself to stop thinking it. I pulled the suitcase out, set it on the bed, and searched for a lock mechanism. A rolled piece of paper slipped out from under the strap. I unrolled it and found the same neat handwriting. The key is under the left-hand pillow. I crawled up, checked beneath the pillow, and found a small key waiting as if it had always belonged there. I unlocked the suitcase. Inside was another envelope, another note, polite, controlled, and unsettling in its certainty. Paul wrote that he would be pleased if I wore each enclosed outfit at least once. The outfits were mine, but he would decide when and where he wanted to see them. I didn't have to agree, but the entire suitcase felt like an expectation packaged as generosity. Then I saw what was inside. 12 black, sealed parcels, each numbered, each identical in shape, heavy enough that I could tell there were shoes inside. At least that much. Another note explained the rules. At any time, I might receive a phone call. I'd be given a pickup time and location, and a parcel number. The parcel would contain an outfit made precisely to fit the measurements I'd provided. I replaced the parcels one by one, my hands strangely careful, as if I were touching a contract without signing it. I finished my champagne slowly, staring at the suitcase like it might blink back. Then I turned off the lights. As I drifted toward sleep, one thought repeated itself, over and over. I didn't know the game, I didn't know the rules, but somehow, I was already playing.